Let's bring in Louis Black, CEO of Almonty Industries. He joins us across in New York, where the company is quadruple listed. It's also listed on the NASDAQ. Louis, great to see you and a pleasure having you on the show. Before we move on to tungsten proper, I want to get a line from you on this Australia-U.S. deal in critical minerals. It just makes so much sense. Why do you think it's taken so long?
Well, I think you have to bear in mind how much products China currently buys from Australia. So they are probably the biggest consumer of Australian resources currently. And so I suppose they felt that they didn't want to get in the middle of something. And now, of course, they've sort of made their mark with the rare earths. But let's see how China responds, because, of course, iron ore is a huge product that's exported from Australia, and China is the biggest consumer of that. So this is certainly going to set things, it's certainly going to get interesting. I think that's the best way to put it.
Yeah, I got to ask you, Louis, for tungsten specifically, this is your space, right? Ultra hard critical mineral, and again, critical mineral, not a rare earth. There's a slight distinction there, used in semiconductors, in tungsten filaments, in armor-piercing rounds as well. Did you know when you started your journey to start acquiring tungsten mines, assets, close to 15 years ago, did you know that China was going to play this card to choke off supply to the rest of the world? And is that why you went into this space?
No. I mean, everyone imagined that this was inevitably going to happen. I mean, it was because it had happened before in 2008. When the financial crisis came, and China canceled all the supply contracts under force majeure, claiming national security. We saw it again during COVID, where you couldn't get shipping out of the same source. So that was the second time that we lost access to tungsten. And now the third time, which is, of course, under the dual use program that they've demanding export permits, and you can't actually use the material for any dual use purposes. So it was inevitable, just no one ever thought it was going to happen on our watch. When I got into this, it was more about the fact that there was a huge scarcity to this product and extremely difficult to process. So that knowledge really only existed in two places in the West. One is a mine in Austria, and one is in the mine in Portugal. And that knowledge was key to what we were trying to do, was that we felt we had this huge competitive advantage because we actually knew how to process this metal. But no one imagined this was going to happen at this moment. I mean, I'd like to take credit for it, but it wouldn't be reasonable.
Well, it sounds like it was a good bet or a good decision to make in any case. Louis, bring us up to date on what's going on in Sangdong. You've got a bunch of mines across the world. As we noted, the pair in Spain, they're kind of asleep, and we won't get into that. Portugal, that's producing nicely for you and generating revenue, I know. Sangdong, it's been a long time coming. Can you give us a specific date when we are going to see output from Sangdong of tungsten?
Well, I mean, it's been a 10-year journey, but this is really how long it takes to build in a democracy, 8 to 10 years, and that's when you're well supported. I saw something earlier that the average time to build a mine in the US is 26 years. So it's a journey, and of course, Korea is not a natural, essentially, mining jurisdiction. So unfortunately, you had to go through a lot of industrial hoops to get there, but we're now on the precipice of actually opening. The mine is finished underground, that's producing, is bringing ore to surface, and we're finding that the plant is now in the final throes of assembly and testing. So it's the largest tungsten project to have been built in the West since the early 70s, and it'll be the second largest tungsten throughput plant on the planet, the biggest one now being the one in Kazakhstan that the CCP have just opened.
And Louis, I was actually reading about your Sandong project in South Korea in local media reports just to get some different color. And they were talking about for 1 ton, China can actually mine at $10. But in South Korea, it's about $500 to $600 going into the same amount of tungsten to be extracted. Can you just give us some clarification around the cost breakdown? Because infrastructure as well as labor may not just be there, as you were just insinuating about South Korea's situation.
Well, no, those numbers aren't, exactly correct. So the mining in China is no longer this cheap idea that people have. They have environmental compliance, they have higher labor costs, they have high energy costs, and they are often overstaffed because that's one of the conditions for the subsidies that they used to receive until last year to keep a lot of these rural, communities intact. And in Korea, yes, it's a more expensive labor market, but energy is much more cost effective than we find in Europe. Regulations, insurance are comparable with Europe. It doesn't cost us $500 a ton. It's the mining cost is around $22 a ton to mine it. Our all-in cost is somewhere in the region of $13,000 a ton for a product that is currently valued at $65,000 a ton. So you can see that there is a good profitability. And the grade in Korea is 3 to 3.5 times the average grade of a Chinese mine. But China is not a cheap place to work anymore. Perhaps absolutely not the case.
Okay, so it must be some old numbers that they were going with. Thanks for the clarification, Louis. So what about this? So my understanding is that you're mining tungsten in Sandong, South Korea. But these ores will be processed in the U.S. So once you bring these ores to the U.S., what is the infrastructure like? Are we comfortable with the costing as well as the the labor elements that you need to get this part of the process done?
Well, unlike rare earths, where they have to obviously ship to plants unfortunately found in China, we actually process on site to a tungsten concentrate. And this ultimately, because it's very dense, same density as gold, it is relatively easy to ship in containers where it goes to the United States to our customers who are vertical all the way through to the finished products. China is the main source for Korea for this same product, for tungsten oxide is what is taken to. And it's one of the reasons why we're now looking with the government to actually build a tungsten oxide plant. So part of our material will go to the United States for US defense purposes, and part of it will remain in Korea to feed the domestic market. It's not a mandatory thing for Korean companies to buy from us. It's just a diversification for them. Because I think it's very important to remember, you cannot move a mine. You're a guest in someone's country, and especially if they use the product, you have to respect that. And I think it's important that we've always had in our plan to work with the local domestic companies as well. So part goes to the United States and part will remain in Korea.
And I was reading that you're also close to finalizing the purchase of a defunct tungsten mine in the U.S. I'm just curious what kind of process it will be to revive a tungsten mine that went defunct. What's the recovery timeline? And again, what's the cost competitiveness like, compared to, say, countries like China, South Korea?
Well, I mean, we are certainly looking at onshoring with some production into the United States and bringing our technology. I mean, our technology was born out of a time where we had to compete against CCP for many years. So we became very efficient and we developed a lot of our own innovations, which ended up producing the world's most valuable form of tungsten, which we produce in Portugal. So we have a level of technology that now that China's mines are entering the free market because they no longer get subsidies, they're about 10 years behind us in terms of efficiencies. The US is not a cheap country to produce in. That's absolutely true. Out of all of the jurisdictions that we operate in, the US will be by far the most expensive. And the mines themselves don't have the kind of scalability that we see in, say, South Korea. They're much more comparable, for instance, to our Spanish assets. But what's important, there hasn't been any mining in the US in tungsten for more than 30 years. And it's important to sort of start to look at that domestic supply. I think it makes good sense for our customers. It makes good sense for the work we do in defense. And it gives us an opportunity to bring our technology into the country. In terms of how quickly you can start up, well, we have data on every single project on the planet. We have one guy in our company that spends his entire working life traveling the world, visiting old mines, new mines, potential mines, whether it be the former Soviet Union, whether in China, whether in Mongolia. This is what he's done in the last 20 years. So we draw up our list of the sort of top 5 US mines, and we sort of pick number 1 and we sort of work our way down the list. to see which one that we would actually try and get involved with. But I think step one, bring our technology into country.
Yeah, wow, what a job, mine assessor. Hope he likes mines. Listen, Louis, so as you were talking to Sherry about, you're eyeing an asset in the U.S. And I want to ask you what may be an uncomfortable question for you, but I think we need to talk about it, right? You spent a lot of time and a lot of money in tungsten. Portugal is producing nicely. You've got good revenue from there. Sangdong has cost you a lot of money. So a lot of people are looking at your financials and saying, you look a little fragile, would probably be a diplomatic way to put it, which leads me to my question,
please.
which is this. Hold on, okay? You're eyeing an asset in the U.S. What if the U.S. were to start eyeing a company like Almonty? And, you know, this isn't out of the realm of possibility because, I mean, you're a Canadian-originated company. The U.S. has just, in the last couple of weeks, right, taken significant stakes in 2 Canadian miners. They're in BC, I know that, right? But somebody like yourself in Almonty, if the Pentagon or the U.S. or Trump were to come to you and go, listen, Louis, how about we take a stake in you? I know you've already got an offtake agreement with the DOD, so that's sort of part of the way there. How would you feel about that? Would that be a good exit for you?
Well, I think first and foremost, we're actually now transitioning into becoming a U.S. company. So NASDAQ listing was stage 1. We're now going through the process of converting everything to U.S. GAAP, and by January 1, we'll be a full reporting issuer in the United States with our primary listing on the NASDAQ. So we will be an American company. So we are re-domiciling into the U.S. and that's of course public. In terms of our balance sheet, our debt is predominantly linked to the project finance loan to build Korea, which of course was a development bank. So it's a much more debt friendly. They're not a commercial bank. They'll be the first to tell you that. They're a tier 1 lender, and their job is to see projects open and succeed, not to actually generate and garnish your return or yield to the same extent as commercial banks. That's why the money is very cheap. If the US government came to us and implied an investor position or an ownership position, my view has been very public with this. I'm happily looking at continuing to supply to the United States, the DOW, to work with them to fix that sort of hole regarding tungsten and for US defense. I think as an investor, and I know that there are many who feel that, some shareholders feel that I should go down this road, but I don't feel that as a major shareholder myself, having put millions of dollars into Almonty personally, and being aligned with my shareholders, as an investor, first and foremost, I'm never really going to find a synergy between an owner or an investor who wants material and I want value. They kind of butt up against each other. And if then I wanted to exit, you're talking about having the world's biggest sledgehammer as your investor, as an investor. It's a recipe for, I don't have the optionality I would like.
Okay, all right, I get it. So key takeaway, nope, you're not selling. How do you feel about this, though? One of the things the U.S. Right now is trying to do, and I think Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was talking about just a couple of days ago, right? In several different industries, and I would assume that it would probably end up applying to rare earths and critical minerals as well, because it's already happening in lithium with MP, as you probably well know, is this idea of setting a floor price, which is probably the best way to cut the legs out from under China. Because in rare earths, as in basically anything else, nobody can produce it cheaper. If that were to happen and be applied on tungsten, how would you feel about that?
Well, I already have contracts with hard floors and no cap on the upside. But in fact, I'm actually a proponent for the free market. High price, low price, the market should determine pricing. And I've been a big supporter of the idea of physically trading the commodity. So holding stockpiles, having futures contracts, going down a traditional transparent route of pricing. I think any support government sort of floor pricing is predicated on the administration that's in power. What happens if the next administration doesn't want to do that and abandons that program? Then the whole house of cards comes down. So I'm pushing for a much more transparent, source of pricing. Even if it hurts me because the price goes down, it must be born out of the free market. If you want a sustainable and thriving supply chain, you must have transparency of price.
And Louis, I believe we touched on the domestic political situation in South Korea the last time we had you on, given the timing of the presidential elections and so on. But are you in any contact or communications with the South Korean government now that the new administration is sort of settled down here? Just because there is a lot of geopolitical considerations that are going in and where these critical minerals and rare earths end up in.
Well, I mean, of course, we always stay in touch with governments, both at local, regional, and national level. There's always an open dialogue. We work and cooperate together. I think ultimately, when the mine opens and then we start to look at where this material is going, the conversations will become more involved. But at this moment, they are incredibly supportive, the new administration. They want to see this project thrive because, of course, it sends a great message to the investing community, as well as the fact that it's going to have a very significant impact on U.S. national security. And I would imagine as a close, as the biggest defense partner for Korea is the United States, this is seen as a very great period of positivity for them, especially in the run up now to APEC. I'm sure this is going to come up in conversation.
Yeah. I have no doubt about that, Louis. And, just because the mine is located in South Korea, is some part of the communications with the South Korean government include, look, we've got the mine. I know it's 100% yours, but we want to guarantee some of it actually gets exported back to or imported back into South Korea so that South Korean companies can use your tungsten?
No, I would not expect the South Koreans to have that conversation. It's a very mature democracy there. There's all the checks and balances, a high level of bureaucracy. This is not a conversation you could have, in such a sort of condition. But we've always said, as a company, we are going to supply into the domestic market. So I wouldn't imagine that conversation would come to fruition because we know that we have to also look at the fact that we are a guest in that country, and we also have great customers domestically. So let's, be under no illusion, there are some fabulous customers in Korea, which we'd be very happy to work with.
All right. And just pivoting away from the discussions that we've had so far, I was reading about this recycling technology. So, recycling tungsten from scrap materials like electronics and used tools and so on. Is that something that you are investing in and working on right now, just because we're talking about this matter of highly related to national security right now?
Well, you can't recycle tungsten from electronics, but you can from the hard metals, tools and cathodes and such. And my customers have really pioneered this since 2008, when they lost access to raw materials from China when they canceled those contracts. And about 50% of the feed comes from scrap. The problem now for the West is that was always a sacred cow. China had a series of environmental regulations in place that precluded them from buying Western scrap and importing it into China, which they actually suspended this regulation back in March. And so from July of this year, they now have, I think, 3 Chinese traders who are licensed to go and buy Western scrap. So all of my customers are now in competition for the same raw materials, both concentrate and scrap, with China. And that has set up a very competitive market for raw materials. But scrap is an important component. That's absolutely the case.
Louis, it's great to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us. Always a great value add to talk to you. Louis Black there, CEO of Almonty Industries.